So I welcome everybody to the 6th roundtable discussion with the Expert Global Forum. It is my utmost pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker, Ian Tonge, author of 2 books and practitioner from the UK. I'm Dr. Aline Nassar, CEO and Board Chairman of Stokos Australia. Stokos specializes in organizational excellence and capacity building. Excuse me. We are leadership development specialists and certified emotional intelligence experts. Stokos builds capacity through customized private training and development, courses and certifications, workshops, and conferences. All our trainings and courses are certified and CPD accredited and are locally and internationally recognized. Our registered group of participants today come from 14 different countries, which I'm going to state alphabetically. We have participants from Australia, Canada, Israel, KSA Lebanon, Oman, Puerto Rico, Qatar, South Africa, Turkey, UAE, UK, Ukraine, and USA. Once again, I welcome you all. Some housekeeping points before we start. You can either use the chat box or the raise hand option for your questions and comments. At the end of the session, I invite you all to take a group photo. And please note that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, and we will be emailing you the link. Today, Ian joins us from the UK to speak on diabetes. Ian will speak on diabetes from the angle of understanding and managing the life of a diabetic. All practical and a lot of experience sharing. A bit about Ian. Almost all of Ian's working life has been spent primarily in the sales environment of the information technology sector. Enjoying a tremendously successful career path, his latter days involved with such but contained in building divisions and business within a high-profile corporate business operation. Having lived such a wonderful, exciting, sometimes terrifying and successful life, Ian wishes to help others with their own issues, anxieties, and fears. As a long-serving practitioner in the art of managing an all-embracing condition and having been granted a second chance at life, Ian feels he has been given a defined purpose to help others with the same or similar disposition. Ian is dedicated to helping other diabetics to understand and benefit more from their own lives, to live a life with more freedom and confidence. Thank you, Ian, for joining us, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Aline. Well, that just about cuts off half of my discussion. Joking. I would ask of you, by the way, Aline did say you can use the chat box to ask questions. I've just noticed as I've got my presentation on full screen that I don't see the chat box. So if you do put it on the chat box, those questions will probably be answered at the end of the presentation. If you require a question answered as we're going through, which I'm more than happy to take, I suggest you alert Aline, who can basically flag me and I can answer whatever is going on there. But yes, good morning and thank you so much. Well, I'd say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the time may be, wherever you are, because it's worldwide. I've always been used to 24/7 operation before in my life, so I guess best way to say this is good day, which is a great Australian expression, I suppose. But thank you so much for joining me for this discussion on diabetes from a practitioner's point of view. Let me hasten to add here, though, that is practitioner with a little e. Little is something I've grown used to in my life, being only 5'5" myself. But little here is I'm not a medical specialist, as I will probably prove to you throughout the course of this discussion. But I am here to divulge my feelings as being a diabetic from a diabetic's perspective. There is lots you can get on the internet. You can Google diabetes and get lots and lots of information, but nothing that tells you actually how it is to live with and what you do and what your thoughts are, what your aspirations are, and everything like that. That's where I'm hoping to leave with you today. I do hope it's going to be an interactive discussion, so I do hope you'll all be able to take from it something that will be lasting for you and give you a greater understanding of diabetes, and especially now because it is Diabetes Awareness Month, November. In fact, was the birth date, November the 14th, was the birth date of the discoverer of insulin. And his team, together with his team, Dr. Frederick Banting, was born on November the 14th. Right, that's enough of that. Let us move on. I'm hoping, by the way, that this is going to be a real interactive session, because me talking to you for a whole hour is nothing that anybody would really want, except, of course, from a mum. And I'm not really even sure about that. Let me first and foremost go through the guide. And I use the term guide advisedly. Basically, this is all going to be driven by how we move forward. And the three dogs are up there in perfect perspective. They are to represent the different idioms. That's you, me, and of course the interaction, because it all depends upon who's going to pull the hardest and furthest as to which way we go through this. But get a more firm and proper understanding and grounding for this discussion, I'm going to cover off what exactly is diabetes. What is it? There are so many ideas as to what it is, and a lot of people don't really understand. I'm hoping to correct that by going through that. Why is it such an important discussion for the world indeed? I'm going to cover off that as well. We'll go through a short history of diabetes, because I think it's best to understand where we've come from and how we're actually going to move forward. Bring off the various types, because again, there are so many. A slight peek into the future, indicating some of the technologies that are coming to us as we move forward. And yes, there are even more to come. And then, and I don't know how I'm going to do this, because I'm going to have such a short time to discuss my favourite topic of all time, that being me. We'll see how that goes. Then, of course, there's going to be question and answer throughout the discussion, and, of course, question and answers at the end. Please ask your questions as we're going through, and I'll try and get them answered in the same idiom. Perhaps the best way of doing this is to go through our digestive system to start off with. That's where it all comes from. Diabetes is a digestive problem, although it's not digestive per se. I'll come to that. Let us look at the diagram we've got here. We have the gastrointestinal line. Sorry, I had to check that then, because I call it all the wrong things. The gastrointestinal line starts in the mouth. That is the highway for all of the food and drink that we can chew. It goes all the way through the body. What happens is that when you put something in your mouth, the mouth is used for mastication of that. And yes, I did say mastication, to enable the food to be passed down through the esophagus into the stomach regions where all the action takes place. However, it is in this area and during the mastication that the first human elements are actually added. That's the human juice elements, that's saliva. In the stomach area, which is where all the action takes place, you get a breakdown to actually produce proteins. That then goes into the lower stomach area, which more work takes place, and that is further broken down into more proteins, minerals, carbohydrates, and the rest. Within that area, you have the liver, which produces bile to break down the fats, removes waste, and stores vitamins, minerals, and those all-important carbohydrates. We'll come to that shortly. From that point, you have the pancreas. The pancreas has two distinct functions. The first, as I mentioned earlier, is in the digestive function. That is the exocrine function of the pancreas. Exocrine function comprises 85% of what the pancreas does, but yet isn't the most important element of what we need from the pancreas. Second function, which is the endocrine function, is the function that regulates the blood sugar. Blood sugar levels are extremely important for the human body. It's blood sugar levels that feed. If you haven't got blood sugar levels, well, you're not here. I'm not talking to you. If you have got blood sugar levels, it's important to maintain them at a level. The pancreas does that in an automatic function for us. It does this by secreting its beta cells that release a wonderful hormone called insulin that basically turns the transfers the carbohydrates into the energy we really need. And it's what is required for a normal life to proceed. Down below, we then got the gallbladder, which basically is a storage unit for the bile produced by the liver. And the gastrointestinal line ends at the anus, which is also known as the bottom of the human world. Quite simply put, though, diabetes is resultant from a failing of the pancreas in this particular equation. The pancreas is either not producing insulin beta cells for one reason or another, and again, we'll cover this later, or it is defunct, it is compromised in doing. What exactly is diabetes? We have several, I've put up here several quotations that I've taken from the internet. Diabetes is a lifelong condition that causes a person's blood sugar level to become too high, which is from the NHS in the UK. Diabetes, on the other hand, is a chronic metabolic disease characterized by elevated levels of blood glucose sugar, which basically says the same thing, but in a different way. Again, from another organization, another profound organization, the American Diabetes Association. Oh, by the way, who is the World Health Organization? Diabetes mellitus is a group of metabolic diseases characterized by hyperglycemia resulting from defects in insulin secretion, insulin addition, or both. Again, that's from the American Diabetes Association. However, whilst these are three descriptions from erstwhile organizations throughout the world, there are two that I feel are misleading. Does anybody recognize which are the two I'm talking about, or which is the most correct version as far as Ian Tonge is concerned? Well, in answer to that question, it's number one. Diabetes per se is not a metabolic disease. And I'll come to that later. It is also an autoimmune disease, or condition, as I much prefer to call it. Diabetes is a lifelong condition. It's a condition that basically, once you've got it, I'm afraid, that's it, you've got it. It's going to be with you for your life. With diabetes type 2, you are able to reverse that diabetes. You can only reverse it by using medication and diet. You can retain a non-diabetic state by maintaining that diet. Diet is an extremely important function Because with diabetes, you can manage it by either diet and medication, diet and insulin, or diet, medication, and insulin. Diet is the one presiding group there. Whichever way you look at it, it's not just a weight control diet, it's a life diet. The effects of not managing that can have extremely devastating effects, including but not limited to general and sexual health, amputations, sight loss, and premature death, to name but a few. None of that sounds particularly good, and none of that is anything that I would wish on anybody. Diabetes is one of the lead.
Yeah.
Yes?
I just have a comment and a question actually in the chat box. One of the participants asked, what about reversing type 2 diabetes mellitus with exercise, as per Michael Mosley?
Yes, you can reverse type 2 diabetes with exercise. Reversing type 2 means you're coming off whatever medication you may be on, which may be metformin or another medication, and indeed you could be on insulin as well. If you're on insulin, it's probably more difficult to do that reversal because your pancreas is in such a state that it needs more insulin than it can ever produce. So that's why you've been prescribed that. But diet and exercise can help you reverse type 2 diabetes. You'll always have it if you then go away from that diet and exercise regime. You have the distinct risk that it will reappear, because it's not gone away, it stayed there, but it's being calmed, it's being controlled. This is how it should be, to be honest with you. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, they say it does. Thank you.
Say non-management can have devastating effects, but indeed it is one of the most leading causes of premature death throughout the world. The World Health Organization and indeed the International Diabetic Federation have all listed diabetes as being number 7 in causing premature death. That figure, the World Health Organization, is rising at an exponential rate and is likely by 2030, 2035 to be at least the 4th leading cause of premature death throughout the world. It's an important consideration. We want to stop this. We want to stop this going on. What I like to feel diabetes is, it's manageable, but diabetes is a condition whereby the body has lost or had depleted its ability to manage the energy requirements so needs to either live properly or indeed survive. It can't be any less than that, unfortunately. It is an important consideration. Let's have a look at how it affects the world as we sit today. These figures are extracted from the World Health Organization website and show here in 2019 the figures for the diabetes population throughout the world, which has been growing at an alarming rate so far, are 463 million diabetics. Mainly type 2, but a lot of type 1 in there as well. 463 million, that's nearly 500 million people throughout the world. An extremely crowded birthing pond, if you ask me. But if you look at the figures here, throughout the world, they are set to rise 51% over the next 25 years. So in 2045, it's expected to be a figure of 700 million. So closing in on 1 billion diabetics throughout the world. And that figure will probably not include people walking around who don't even know they've got diabetes yet. So it's quite alarming. But if you look at these figures, North American Caribbean is rising by 33%. Africa, that is a horrific increase rate. Something we have to stop, as with Middle East and North Africa, as in South Asia. These are all figures, and indeed the Western Pacific. The only one that's really of any reasonable mark, if you got 15% on your bank account, by the way, you'd think you were rich. 15% increase on diabetes in Europe isn't a rich statement, that's actually a poor statement, because when you look at the cost implications of diabetes, it is actually more horrific than you can possibly imagine. I've got some figures here. For the NHS in the UK, they represent a figure of £10 billion a year spent on diabetes-related problems. That equates to £1.5 million an hour, or £25,000 per minute. That's 10% of their total annual revenue is spent on diabetes-related problems. And we're just a small island off the coast of Europe. There we are, that little bit there. Is everybody okay with those figures? I'm not intending giving people nightmares.
Participants are wowing the numbers and the figures.
It is quite frightening, and everybody is putting all of their resources into halting that rise. In fact, the World Health Organization have dictated that the world has to slow this increase by 2035. Hopefully this will affect those figures somewhat, as long as they can find the right way to do this. And there are technologies coming along that hopefully will help with that, and hopefully will help with even the populations we've got, lowering the costs. That's all to do with governments and how they spend their money. Right. I think it would help immensely to understand where we've actually come from as a diabetic population. Diabetes, the records of diabetes go back some 3 centuries now. First known recognition was provided in the Papyrus Ebers in 1552 BC, where H.C. Ra wrote of an illness that resulted in far too frequent urination, where patients often succumbed to their. In the 1st century AD, a Greek philosopher, Aristeas, vividly documented the destructive capabilities of the illness, in actual fact calling it diabetes for the first time. And diabetes is a Greek word, an ancient Greek word for siphon, meaning flowing through. What Aristeas actually was, it was rendering the patient with intense thirst and melting down of flesh and limbs into urine. Oh my God. I'm sounding like a horror story. I do apologize. I hope there's no children watching. But that does sound awful. It was assumed anybody diagnosed with anything like diabetes that they had a death sentence. And it was realized that life with diabetes is short, disgusting, and painful. And I just add, I mentioned I'm only 5'5", but that was not a description of me. I am short, but I'm not sure about disgusting, but I suppose, yeah, I am in a lot of pain, but again, I can talk later. Many of the early treatments for diabetes were basically providing against what had been lost through urination. They provided high carbohydrate type treatments for diabetes, which basically meant, yes, it was going to be an awful, painful and short life for a diabetic. There was, in certain cultures and certain areas, a growing band of water tasters. Now, these were people whose function in life was to taste the urine of suspected diabetic patients. This was basically to provide a check as to whether or not it tasted like honey. Now, I've had quite a few questionable glasses of wine in my life, but that's certainly not a job that I would ever want to apply for. Don't know about you, but it doesn't sound good to me, and they couldn't pay me enough money to do it.
Well, I was going to ask, was it highly paid?
I've got no idea, but danger money was something I think needed to come into that equation. But I mentioned, did it taste like honey? That's where the term mellitus came in to be used in accordance with diabetes. Mellitus is Latin for honey, and now we have diabetes mellitus. Perhaps most of the treatments started to move into a better progression as we move forward. In around about 1870, in the Franco-Prussian War, it was noticed by, a French physician, Apollinaire Bouchardet, recognized the lowering of blood glucose levels in the urine of diabetic patients caused by food rationing. So they then realized that actually high carb is wrong. Let's reduce the carbohydrate portion. And therefore, we actually had a benefit of war, which, hey, can't be bad. War's never good, but that one actually helped us. But a short time before that, in 1869, a student named Paul Langerhans basically was investigating the pancreas and recognized the beta cells, those cells responsible for carrying the insulin. He recognized these, and they were renamed in his honor as being the islets of Langerhans. That was probably one of the most important discoveries available to us to bring us to what we now know as our current livelihoods. The man's best friend, as ever, a dog, used by very first by Oscar Minkowski and Joseph von Mehring, who removed the pancreas of the dog to check its effects on the digestion. The dog developed diabetes. Unfortunately, it died, but then efforts were directed to establish how to provide these secretions. At the end of the war, to end all wars, not sure why that didn't work. First World War, in 1917-18, the Spanish flu. But there was a group of extremely gifted individuals, all based in Canada, and I think all went to the Ontario University in Canada. There was Dr. Frederick Banting, there was Charles Herbert Best, there was John James Rickard MacLeod, and later James Bertram Collett, who between them basically came up with insulin. It was first called Isletin, obviously, islets of Langerhans, first known as Isletin, but its first usage wasn't successful. The very first patient ever given this insulin treatment was a young boy, 14-year-old, by the name of Leonard Thompson. His photograph is to the left of this screen. That's before and after. Before he was on the treatment, and after, you can see there's depraved look in the initial photograph. He looks a bit healthier. I mean, he survived another 14 years as a result of insulin treatment when he was literally on death's door at that when he came in. Isletin soon became known as insulin. Don't know why the name was changed, but it was, and the rest is history. It was commercialized by Eli Lilly in accordance with the wishes expressed by Dr. Banting and his team, purely because they needed this to be a worldwide treatment. They couldn't do that on their own. Which basically, we're coming up to the 100th anniversary of the discovery of insulin. That's going to be in January, 2021. But it was in the mid-1970s, by the way, that for those that are listening, that we came to understand that type 2 diabetes could be differentiated from type 2. Before that, prior to that, it was all to do with being diabetic. When I was first diagnosed in 1958, I was a diabetic. We weren't type 1, type 2. I was a juvenile diabetic, but hey, that was it. Because I was juvenile, I suppose. That brings me on to the types of diabetes we have.
Yeah, before we go to the types of diabetes, Ian, we do have a question from Diane. The question states, you can contract diabetes at any age. Is this correct?
Yes, absolutely. You can contract type 1 diabetes at any age. We'll come to that because your immune system can be battered. COVID is a prime example of this. So yes, you can. And type 2 in particular, if you pummel your pancreas, you'll get it giving in and suddenly finding that it's not providing you with the necessary amount of insulin you require. So yeah, it is possible.
Thank you.
Hopefully that will answer your question. Let me explain to you the 2 types of diabetes. And again, this probably brings me to the point I made very, very early on about metabolic condition. Type 1 diabetes is not a metabolic condition. It has got nothing to do whatsoever with the metabolism that you have in your body. It is an autoimmune condition. Type 1 diabetes has been caused basically by your autoimmune cells attacking your pancreas beta cells, mistaking them for being alien. And therefore, in its own way, it's protecting your body. It's not doing that, it's actually causing you more harm, but that's a mistake in the autoimmune system. So it's an autoimmune condition. The causes can be, it's not really actually 100% certain what causes type 1 diabetes. The biggest cause has to be related to, and as I mentioned before, your autoimmune system taking a battering. I was actually diagnosed almost immediately following having chickenpox as a young child. Chickenpox is caused by an autoimmune, and the autoimmune system goes ahead and tries to kill off the chickenpox virus. It didn't help with didn't help with its killing off my beta cells at the same time. The Spanish flu was probably the first pandemic where this was recognized because not much research was being done before then. In 1917-18, it was recognized that Spanish flu was causing a higher gradient of type 1 diabetes diagnoses. Spanish flu, funnily enough, does anybody know where it came from?
I read something about it, but I can't remember, honestly. But when COVID first started. China,
yeah.
Surprise.
I don't know what it is about China, but they like sending out their flu viruses to everyone. I don't know why it was called Spanish. That's maybe as a way of hiding the real culprit. Type 2 type 1 is insulin-dependent diabetes. The condition whereby your pancreas no longer is able to basically send out the insulin through its because it hasn't got any beta cells to do that. They've been killed off. Effectively, you are in need of taking insulin to basically live. Type 2 diabetes is insulin-resistant diabetes. What is that? I mean, basically, it means your pancreas may still be working, still operable, but the insulin it is providing has either been compromised or you have battered it to the extent that it cannot handle itself anymore. This is indeed a metabolic condition. So going back to the World Health Organization, American diabetes, this is where the metabolism comes in. Causes of type 2 diabetes, well, if your pancreas has had a problem, you could become type 2 diabetic. If you have had pancreatic cancer, you can become type 2 diabetic. If you've had a severe illness, you can become type 2 diabetic. If you're getting old, you can become type 2 diabetic. The biggest root cause of type 2 diabetes throughout the world today is obesity. Fast food really has got a lot to answer for. Obesity is the #1 cause for type 2 diabetes. Recognised, and it's being worked on, and as you've probably seen, the amount of healthy diets and the inability of fast food outlets to advertise at a certain time to children, what have you. They're working on it. Whether or not that will work is another matter altogether. I did mention that there are a lot of types of diabetes being put out there. You've got type 1.5, which is latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. LADA for short. LADA was a cheap Russian car when I was a young child. I'm not sure about this. And you've also got type 3 diabetes. Type 3 diabetes is where it has been recognised that the brain has had an effect from high blood sugar, hypoglycemia, to affect the hippocampus, which is the memory part of your brain, but the hippocampus is the long-term memory part of your brain. Hence, this can lead to Alzheimer's and dementia. That has a label of type 3. I use that as a label. I also use 1.5 as a label because they haven't been ratified. The only 2 ratified types of diabetes currently, and that will always remain the case, are type 1 and type 2.
Ian, we do have 1 comment and 2 questions. So one of the participants commented that she's got diabetes at the age of 26.
Yeah.
And the first question is, are we talking about our immune system rather than an autoimmune system?
We're talking about
our immune system rather than autoimmune system.
We've all got an autoimmune system. Our autoimmune system is responsible for helping us get over and fight illnesses. What the autoimmune system has done in this respect is our own autoimmune system that has done this, the one that we have within our bodies that has basically attacked good cells rather than bad, because the beta cells produced by the pancreas are good cells. They've been mistakenly recognized by the autoimmune system as being bad. When it's under a great deal of pressure, I suppose even the most eloquent of professors can make mistakes when they're under such pressure. So the autoimmune system is no different in that respect. I'm not sure I understood that question. Autoimmune is what we've got. That is our own autoimmune systems. And the age of 26 is not unusual to become diabetic. You can become diabetic older, you can become diabetic a lot younger. I was diagnosed at the age of 2. So I've been diabetic virtually all my life.
Okay, so to the answer to your reply was, oh, okay, a matter of naming. I would have said we all have an immune system, but in some of us, it turns against ourselves and causes disease.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Hopefully that's what I explained, but yeah, that's
the other
happens automatically, which is why it's called the autoimmune system.
Right. The other question was probably when you were talking about the different types of diabetes, and you mentioned the diabetes 3 and stuff, there was question, drug-induced diabetes?
Yeah. If you're doing something that affects your body, the drugs are going to affect your metabolism. So that's going to be type 2 that you will get as a result of drug-induced diabetes. It's unlikely to be type 1. But then again, if you have type 2, which you can equally drive, I'm sure, with drugs and paraphernalia like that, yeah, that can harm as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, let's have a quick peek at the future, shall we? This is something that I'm particularly interested in. We have a thing, well, we've had now for many years, insulin pump therapy for diabetics. Diabetics now can actually put system onto their, generally into their abdomen area, that will feed them with a prescribed amount of insulin. Now that has become to such an extent that it produces an artificial pancreas. This has come from the very first insulin pumps that we used were the size of backpacks, a huge backpack that would need to be used in order to feed you the insulin, rather than taking, and I'll show you one of the syringes we used to use shortly, but rather than taking an injection, you were forced to wear something that was huge and probably needed a heavyweight truck to carry it along with you. They became, I think in 1980, the Biostar insulin infusion system was probably the first to use continuous subcutaneous insulin, which basically means a slower output of insulin into the systems for you. But the Biostar insulin infusion system in the 80s became the first artificial pancreas. We are moving that way. Our pancreas transplants have probably always been, well, of late, always been available. But pancreas transplants have all the problems there of rejection by the system. By having a pump system on the outside rather than the inside, means that we have removed that risk. The risk of insulin pump systems back in the day, which is why I never chose to use one, was the risk of what they call stacking. So your insulin pump system, you would basically take a shot if you were going high. You could stop it if you were going low, but basically you were going low, so you need to correct yourself on that imbalance as you move forward. You take a sweet drink and what have you. Going high, it would basically shoot insulin into you. That would cause you stacking if that insulin is applied in the life cycle of the insulin you've already had. You're adding insulin to act on already active insulin, which is never a good thing. It can cause a hypo, and in actual fact, it's like drinking beer, drinking lots of alcohol with insulin. You're doing stacking because alcohol does the same thing as insulin does. It lowers your blood sugar levels. That took me away from that. But now, because I should have worn a short sleeve, but I don't know if anybody can see, that's my testing equipment there. All I've got to do a test now is that shows you where I am. I'm 9.2 at this moment. So it's not a bad level. It's in the green, so it's okay. It's a little higher than I would like, but there you go. That system, this system that's on my arm, is developed now so that it can actually work with an insulin pump. Which means if I'm going high, it will direct the insulin pump to make a correction if the timing is right to do that, and if the insulin is working, it's very, very clever. It's got a brain the size of a planet inside of that particular system. If I'm going low, it will stop the insulin coming through and allow me to hit me with an alarm, and I'll go and get myself a sweet drink. Sorry, you had a question there?
No, I said one of the comments was, this is impressive, and I agree. It's very impressive.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful. And then if I could have thought we'd have this sort of thing back in my early days, the late 50s, early 60s and 70s, I'd be amazed. I'd be amazed. If we had this now, then I think we'd all be jumping around like Billy-O. It's wonderful. The technical, in 2014, actually, I'll make a point here, driving towards this artificial pancreas area, I was involved in a research into what they call loop technology. Loop technology is automated insulin delivery, and I go back to what was that said before about continuous subcutaneous insulin. Continuous subcutaneous insulin is what your actual pancreas does for you. Having this on the outside of your body rather than on the inside doesn't make you any more of a robot than I am already, and I'm probably that way anyway. But this loop technology system was being researched. I went into hospital, had implanted into me a unit which is a little smaller than the thing that I've got strapped to my arm now, attached to my arm. That unit was put into my shoulder about 1/4 inch down, which is the subcutaneous layer of your body. That instrument there was to measure my blood glucose sugar levels at certain times of the day and night and what have you. I couldn't do that myself. I had to go into the hospital once a month. Sorry, once a month, yeah, for 6 months to go through a process where they starve me, they'd feed me. I was not on my own doing this, by the way. There were lots of other individuals doing that as well. But basically, this was all designed so that in the future, we could have had a system that they could plant into your arm to do all of this. They realized that this wasn't the way forward, but that was a step towards getting what we now see as the artificial pancreases that are available now. I mean, artificial pancreas, here I come. All I'm hoping for is that medical technology will also work so they can actually add 6 inches to my legs so that I can actually become nearly 6 foot. Hey, that's a wish. My dad was 6 foot. At least I think he was my dad. Now here we have brand new technology from an organization called AFON Technologies. And what it is, it's a microwave technology providing non-invasive blood glucose checking capability. Now, what do I mean by non-invasive, and why is that so important? Well, diabetics, like myself, throughout my life, I've had to do sugar tests. Initially, they were urine sugar tests, and that was probably up to about early 1980. Then we moved to blood glucose meters. Blood glucose meters meant we had to finger prick every so often to extract blood, to put onto a strip, and then to do a blood test. Their accuracy was relatively good, but it has improved over time. But nonetheless, you can't take away from the fact that you were constantly finger pricking. And I've always worked on the basis that I will check as much as I possibly can to ensure that I'm safe. I don't want to go into a hypo. I definitely don't want to go into a hyper. Hypo has always been my preferred route, but being in a hypo can be a little dangerous. So doing my tests meant that I could avoid that as much as possible. Didn't always work, but it got me through. My fingers became like stubbles. It was becoming more and more difficult and more painful to extract the blood. Luckily, I got this continual glucose meters, which is the CGM, which, whilst it does a great thing and reduces the amount of finger pricks, it's still invasive. When I put this onto my arm, the back of my arm, it basically shoots a very, very thin, small needle so that that needle goes into the subcutaneous level of my skin. So it does the testing as appropriate, but it's still invasive. And it's still a bit of a pain. It can get knocked off, it can get pulled off. And with the grandkids at the moment, I think I've had to replace 2 or 3 of the meters, and they're very expensive, because playing with the grandkids means they grab hold of me and they've pulled it off. So yeah, it is invasive. This technology is non-invasive. It uses microwave technology to provide consistently and extremely accurate blood glucose level testing. The power that's in this microwave technology, by the way, equates to lower than you commonly get from a mobile phone. And in so being is totally safe in usage. It's currently in development. Proof of concept testing has proven to be a total success, and there is still a lot more to be done. But if you look at these areas here of the accuracy, that is superb as far as diabetes is concerned. That's the sort of accuracy that we cry out for. The subcutaneous level doesn't actually apply that accuracy as far as I'm aware. Subcutaneous level actually is a latency behind blood glucose level testing. So it's not always going to be 100% accurate, but it's accurate enough to be going on with. What we've got here is a technology, though, that really can take this bull by the horns and work perfectly without, if you've got it on your wristwatch, which they're actually working on at this moment in time, or I imagine it'll go onto a mobile phone or anything that you've got on your person to enable you to do a test without any penalties whatsoever. I look forward to the future of AFON technologies, and John is, I believe, on the session today. And if you check AFON technologies on the internet, I'm sure they will be more than happy to answer any questions you have technically about their offering and where it's going to and where it may be sitting at this moment in time. Is everybody happy with that?
Yep.
Now we come to the most important bit, me. My favourite part is upon us. I've written this down. Oh dear, I feel like Churchill. Can you guess, by the way, which one is me?
I can.
Yeah, I'm the one without the teddy bear. My bigger brother, and he's always been my bigger brother, Nick the teddy bear. Even in my youth, he was always going to get what I had and what I wanted. But what we've got here is an extremely important question. Sorry, let's go through this properly. A diabetic has got to live a life of, it's like a roller coaster ride. You are juggling your life with managing yourself because you've taken away this automatic management by the pancreas, because it can't do that for one reason or another. You've taken that away and you've got to manage it yourself. By virtue of that particular fact, there are always going to be areas where it isn't a smooth curve. Your curve, blood glucose level, would probably be like that. Ours is like that. It's like a roller coaster ride. You're always juggling highs and lows, whichever way you look at it and wherever you go. And if you have a high, you then go low. If you have a low, you then go high. And it is just a continuing circle of activity in that respect. Going too high, however, can give you problems. You feel like death. You don't want to do anything. You really are. The lethargy is immense. And in all honesty, you want to curl up in a ball and just go away and never reappear. Other than that, though, It can make you feel very thirsty, lots of side effects, constantly going to the toilet and all this sort of thing. So you can't really curl up on your ball, because if you did that, you'd end up in a right mess. However, having said that, the worst thing it can do is continual high blood sugar levels will give you diabetic. You're inviting those in. I've been diabetic now 62 years. And according to my retinopathy examination consultant, I'm quite unique. Somebody who's had diabetes for so long without any of the complications arising is a relatively unique factor. I don't think that should be right, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing now, to hopefully help others to stop getting complications in their future. However, hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugar, is not the worst event you can have. The worst event actually is the opposite. It's hypoglycemia, or low blood sugar. Low blood sugar can be caused by a number of reasons. If you're not diabetic, you can overexercise. You can, as I have done in my past, unfortunately, I have to admit it, I've not been a saint, get drunk on occasion. Alcohol affects your body the same way as insulin does. Alcohol will reduce your blood sugar levels. The way of getting over an alcoholic night out is having a sweet drink in the morning. It doesn't mean you can drive, but it means you can feel more alive and lose that headache and all the fuzziness and everything. Exactly what you do to get over hypoglycemic attack with diabetes. You basically have a sweet drink. Lucozade in my respect. I'm actually quite addicted to it. Probably have it intravenously fed if I'm not careful. But when you're too low, you can feel giddy. You can have fuzzy eyesight. You really are incapable of proceeding on a day-to-day basis. You've got to get, as quickly as possible, a sweet drink. Luckily, hypoglycemia gives us alerts. Alerts are you'll start sweating. Your hands or your feet will tingle, your extremities tingle. So you know something is going on there, and you can therefore test and act accordingly, what I do. However, if I've not noticed it, my darling wife and family will notice it. Karen will look at me and she'll say, go and do a blood test, because my eyes have gone crystal blue. I've got blue eyes, but they go crystal blue, a very, very bright blue, when I'm going into low blood sugar state. The problem with hypoglycemia, of course, is that it can cause death. You can pass out, go into a coma, and that's it. So you've got to be careful. However, I will say this, diabetes will not kill you, but you can kill yourself with diabetes. Right? Say that advisedly. You can eat yourself to death. You can not take your correction elements as required. You can ignore the fact that you're going low. It's not diabetes that's killing you, basically yourself not taking the corrective actions, because you can manage it, and it's very important to do that.
That's a wonderful way of saying it. And
that's me as a diabetic. What do I do as a diabetic? I check myself on a frequent basis. I make sure that I am on top of my diabetes. It's a very simple process. It's not difficult. It's not hard. It's not backbreaking. All I've got to do is, like, beforehand I used to have to prick my finger. Now all I've got to do is scan my phone. And I've got another scanner as well in case my phone's out of battery or I'm change meters or whatever. So things can work for diabetics. Even type 2 diabetes have all these facilities. They can test themselves. They can check themselves. They will get alerts. It's our body alerting us, nothing more, nothing less. So what that brings me to really is to ask a couple of questions. What is it we all want from themselves and their lives? Well, from my perspective, I want to properly enjoy my life. I want to get the most out of it I possibly can. We get one life, let's make the most of it. We want to do what we want when we want to do it. We want our energy supplies to enable us to fulfill our obligations in life and to make sure that we can have as much fun as possible. We want to stay healthy, fit, and in control. We also want fewer worries.
Ian, a question that came through the chat a while ago says there are many things on the internet where people are claiming some diets have cleared them of diabetes.
Oh.
So I am not sure, the person who's asking says, I'm not sure that would be true. What is your opinion on this?
Avoid them like the plague. If that would be the case, then the whole medical world, as I said about the cost of diabetes to the medical world, that would be, the whole medical world would be driving you to make sure you got those diets. They don't exist. There is no miracle cure, certainly not for type 1. If you work correctly and eat the right things and do the right things as a type 2, you have a chance of reversing it. But don't go to anyone on the internet who's claiming doctor this, did that, he can cure AIDS, and he can do this and he can do that. He can't do any of this. What he can do is he can extract you from your finances. That's basically all that's to do with. Seriously, I feel for those people. There are lots that are conned into it, and they spend money, and it's a false promise. You won't get your money back because they're sunning themselves in the Bahamas or on a private jet somewhere. That's if they've made it, and hopefully my cause will stop them doing that. So no, I would stay clear of them, and I'd work with your medical professionals all the time rather than some ne'er-do-well on the internet.
Okay.
What might help us here is to show you some of the things that we were forced to endure in the early times of my diabetes diagnosis. I use the term weaponry there. What I like to refer to it as is a home heavy-duty drilling set. That particular instrument there is actually one of the more later versions of the glass syringes. That what we had to do was we had a needle and a syringe that we boiled in a pan of water, about 5 minutes, and then we used. It cooled down, obviously. Sometimes you had to do things to cool it down, but these are things that we were forced to do when, hey, unfortunately, even mums forget things. Many a pan has been burnt on the stove because we'd forgotten to turn it off. But that is a glass syringe that we used. Now, we had to use the glass syringe until broken. We had to use the needle, possibly, if I recall correctly, anything up to about 3 or 4 weeks. Now, 3 or 4 weeks of use, whilst it was relatively clean because you sterilised it in this boiling pan, that needle tip, and it wasn't that thin, it was more dart-like, became extremely blunt, so was extremely painful. I used to pray for that pan overboiling on the hob so that a new needle could be used. But if you think about it, and here I'm going to prove my worthiness of having an O-level mathematics, let's use the 3 weeks. So you've got 21 days. I was on a regime then of strictly 2 injections per day. I had an injection before breakfast, an injection before my tea or dinner. So 21 days times 2, that's 42 uses of a needle. Now that proves my worthiness to getting grade 1 CSE mathematics, doesn't it? 21 times 2 is 40. 21 times 2 is 42. If you look under a microscope to see what one use of a needle does, quite frightening. Latterly, we then moved over to these disposable needles, which removed most of that particular issue because disposable needle, you use it once and you throw it away. But the reuse of needles was frightening. It really was. Then we had to do a check of our urine, a wee test, as I used to call it. What we'd do is we'd get hold of, we'd find a toilet, have a wee into a receptacle, and anything. And I mean, you could even use a small cup as a receptacle, a glass bowl at home, but yeah, if you were out somewhere else, then you had to find something to put it in. You'd put drops into a test tube, you put water into a test tube, you'd have the clinic test tablet, it would fizz frantically for a couple of seconds and then would end up as a colour. That colour would either be negative, let me move this a bit, negative, a trace which was 1/4%, 0.5%, 0.75%, 1%, or 2%. We were told to remain within the 0.5 and 3/4% ratio as much as possible. I deemed it possibly better for me to be around about the 0.5%, and because I was so active as a child, I was often in the quarter or even negative area. The thing about this, it took so long to find a place where you could actually have a wee in any sort of comfort to do this. Toilets in those days, certainly public toilets, were not exactly the cleanest places to visit. You had the problem with regard to manually recording everything you did at the age of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, probably even a lot longer from that. You had to find a piece of paper to put the recorded result on, or you'd forget it. And basically, testing the urine, the latency is frighteningly different from blood glucose. 0.25%, we were told to remain higher than this, is rated as being 11 mmol, which is quite a high level from a diabetic. You really want to retain a level of anything between 5 to 7 rather than the 11s and above, and even 0.25% was at that level. Heaven knows what we were traipsing around when we were going up the higher levels. I worry and wonder how the heck I managed it so far without getting
Ian, probably another 5 excuse me, 5 to 7 minutes.
Here we go. Well, here we go. That, by the way, is me on a red nose day. I've always wanted to build up funds for charity. I properly enjoy my life. I've eaten even from the very start. I've lived every single moment almost as if I was a normal person. I'm not normal in a lot of ways, let alone diabetes, but there you go. I've had my fulfillment. I do what I want when I want it. I've worked with a vigor not recognizable as being a diabetic or anybody with such a widely affecting condition. I eat, drink, and do what I like in moderation. I keep myself checked. I don't gorge. Yeah, I have on occasion had more than 1 or 2 drinks and ended up in a sloppy state. But you do that as a youngster. Unfortunately, only as a youngster I did it. But there you go. I've remained in the best of health. I've got 100% clean bill of health as far as diabetes is concerned anyway. And I don't really have any worries. I keep on going. My future is about as secure as I could have made it. And now all I want to do is to work to benefit others. How am I going to do this? Well, Eileen mentioned before, I've written 2 books. I have diabetes, diabetes does not have me, is the head title of both of these books. Both are written basically to help others. Why have I written them? Well, I wanted to prove to the world that it wasn't as dark as it needs to, as you have probably been told it will be by professionals. Even the professionals tell you you're in for a dark and dastardly future. Well, it's not like that. You grab it by the horns, you make it what you want to make it. And I prove to people by virtue of little examples of my life throughout these books, that being in the physical capacity, that being in the mental capacity. Mental capacity was driven because at the end of my physical capacity, I went for a walk on the M1 motorway. I got hit by a car traveling at 80 miles an hour. That made a mess of my physicality capabilities. I can walk, I can hobble, but I can't run. I can't do any of the things that I used to do as a younger person. But that didn't change my life as a diabetes. All it meant was I managed myself there. I managed myself here. How else am I making life better for diabetic? Two, I've got a guidance in these books, is literally all the profits are being donated to further diabetic research and services. They are available on Amazon and Google, and all you've got to do is go to your local Amazon and Google to shop. And that basically, I think,
that
is
was
me.
Ian, the last I checked, it was $4.99, like $5 literally for a book.
Yep.
So $5 for a book, and all of it goes to diabetic research. So
all the profits. I'd like to say all of it. The trouble is, on both Amazon and Google take, I think, 30, 40, 50% of the fees. It depends on how many you sell as to what sort of level they take. The more I sell, the less level they take. But yeah, all the profits go to diabetic research and services. Because that's important to me. I want the future to be bright. In fact, they do say the future is bright. My version of that is the future is bright, the future is diabetes.
wonderful.
So are there any questions?
All the questions that were already put in the chat were answered. If anybody else has a question, please open your cam, go ahead and say it, ask it. If there are no questions, I'd like to invite you all to open your cameras so we can take a group photo before we thank Ian for a very nice session.
Okay, thank you.
So probably on the, there we go. On the count of 3, if you want to smile to the camera. 1, 2, 3. Thank you all, and thank you, Ian, very much. We really enjoyed it. We had to start a few minutes later. This is why it dragged a bit, but it was very informative, and you have been through a lot, but your resilience is to be commended for sure.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, everybody.
When you told as a youngster that you're going to lose your sight, your limbs, and everything like that, you've got to do something to fight against that. And I want to help others do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Guys, thank you.
Bye-bye.